When my brother David told me at Dad's funeral on that cold November afternoon in 2019, precisely at Riverside Memorial Cemetery, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, "You don't deserve to run Dad's company. You're too old school for modern business, Mike. It's time for real leadership," I smiled, shook his hand, and walked to my car. I made one call to my forensic accountant while sitting in the cemetery parking lot, watching the last mourners say goodbye to the man who'd built everything we had from nothing. By Christmas that year, I had quietly purchased $2.3 million of David's personal debt from 3 different creditors. And that was just the beginning of my plan. Justice must be restored and arrogance punished. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Let me tell you how I got to this point and why what happened next was so perfectly deserved. My father, Frank Warwick, started Warwick Manufacturing in 1952 with a $5,000 loan from Pittsburgh National Bank and a dream bigger than the cramped garage where he set up his first welding station. He was 23 years old, fresh out of the Army Corps of Engineers, and convinced he could build better steel fabrication equipment than the companies that were charging local manufacturers twice what the work was worth. For 35 years, I watched Dad turn that garage operation into one of Pennsylvania's most respected manufacturing companies. He taught me that success comes from understanding your materials, respecting your workers, and delivering exactly what you promise, exactly when you promise it. "Mikey," he'd tell me while we worked side by side in the shop, "a man's word is the only currency that never loses its value." I joined the company officially in 1987, right after graduating from Carnegie Mellon with my mechanical engineering degree, but I'd been working in Dad's shop since I was 12 years old, learning to read blueprints, operate machinery, and understand that every piece of steel we shaped would become part of something important: bridges, buildings, ships that would serve America for decades. David joined the company in 1992, fresh out of Stanford with his MBA and a head full of business theories that had never been tested on a factory floor. Dad was proud of David's education. Our family had never produced a Stanford graduate before, but I could see the difference in how David approached the work. Where I saw craftsmanship and precision, David saw profit margins and efficiency metrics. From the beginning, David made it clear he considered himself the business brain of the operation. He'd walk through the factory in his pressed shirts and expensive shoes, talking to workers about optimizing throughput and leveraging core competencies. The guys on the floor would roll their eyes and get back to work, but they respected him because he was Frank Warwick's son. I didn't mind David's approach, even though it was different from mine. The company needed both perspectives, someone who understood the manufacturing process and someone who could handle the business side. For years, we worked well together. I focused on operations, quality control, and client relationships. David handled finances, marketing, and strategic planning. But somewhere along the way, David started believing his Stanford MBA made him more qualified to run the company than my 30-plus years of experience building it from the ground up. The shift became obvious around 2015, when Dad started talking about succession planning. At 78, Dad was still sharp, but he was tired. He'd built the company from nothing to $50 million in annual revenue, and he wanted to ensure it would thrive long after he was gone. David began making comments about modernizing leadership and bringing fresh thinking to outdated processes. He'd question my decisions in front of employees, suggesting that my hands-on approach was inefficient compared to his strategic vision. When I'd defend practices that had worked for decades, David would smile condescendingly and say, "That's very old school, Mike. Maybe it's time to try something new." The comments stung, but I kept quiet because I thought David was just trying to establish his own identity within the company. I figured once Dad made his succession decision, we'd settle into our roles and continue building what our father had started. I was wrong about David's intentions, but I was right about Dad's decision. In 2005, Frank Warwick named me CEO of Warwick Manufacturing. David became VP of Operations, a position that gave him significant authority while recognizing my broader experience and deeper understanding of our clients' needs. Dad's reasoning was simple. Mike built this company with me. He knows every machine, every process, every client relationship. He's earned the right to lead. David accepted the decision gracefully, at least publicly, but I started noticing subtle changes in his attitude. Over the next 14 years, I grew Warwick Manufacturing from 15 million to 50 million in annual revenue. We expanded our capabilities, upgraded our equipment, and developed relationships with defense contractors that provided steady, high-margin work. I personally guaranteed a $3 million loan during the 2008 financial crisis to keep all our employees working, when other manufacturers were laying off workers. Every decision I made was focused on building long-term value while honoring the principles Dad had taught me. David benefited from every bit of that growth. His profit-sharing bonus alone averaged over $200,000 a year. When his real estate investments failed in 2012, I helped him restructure his personal finances without asking questions. When his son needed money for college in 2016, the company provided a scholarship that covered full tuition. I treated David like the partner I thought he was, even when his contributions didn't match his rewards. But David's respect for my leadership continued to erode. He started missing board meetings, claiming he was working on strategic initiatives that never seemed to produce results. He began scheduling his own meetings with our larger clients, telling them he was coordinating account strategy without discussing it with me first. Most concerning, he started talking about bringing in outside investors and exploring partnership opportunities with international manufacturers. I should have paid more attention to that last comment, but I was focused on running the company and managing our most important client relationships. Warwick Manufacturing had built a reputation for reliability and security that took decades to establish. Our defense contractor clients trusted us with sensitive projects because they knew we protected their information like it was our own. The warning signs were there, but I missed them because I still saw David as my little brother who needed support and guidance, not as someone who might be planning to undermine everything our father had built. Dad died on November 10, 2019, after a brief battle with lung cancer. He was 82 years old and had worked almost until the end, coming into the office 3 days a week to review projects and talk with long-time employees who'd become like family to him. His last words to me were, "Take care of the company, Mike, and take care of your brother. Family is all that matters." The funeral was held at Riverside Memorial Cemetery on a grey November afternoon that felt like Pennsylvania steel, cold, solid, and enduring. Over 300 people attended, including employees, clients, suppliers, and community leaders whose lives Dad had touched during his 67 years in business. I delivered the eulogy, talking about Dad's integrity, his commitment to American manufacturing, and his belief that honest work was the foundation of a meaningful life. I spoke about the thousands of jobs he'd created, the communities he'd supported, and the legacy of excellence he'd left for future generations. David spoke after me, and his comments were different in tone. He talked about Dad's vision for growth and modernization, his forward-thinking approach to business development, and his understanding that companies must evolve to survive. David's eulogy felt like it was preparing the ground for changes he planned to make, rather than honoring the man who'd given us everything we had. After the service, people gathered at our family home for the traditional meal and sharing of memories. I spent hours talking with employees, clients, and friends who wanted to share stories about Dad's kindness, his work ethic, and his impact on their lives. It was exhausting but meaningful, exactly the kind of send-off Dad would have wanted. David arrived late to his own father's funeral dinner, driving a brand-new BMW M5 that must have cost $90,000. When I asked him about the car, he shrugged and said, "Life's too short to drive boring cars, Mike." Dad would have understood. That comment bothered me because Dad had driven the same Ford F-150 pickup truck for 12 years, only replacing it when the transmission finally gave out. Dad believed in living comfortably, but not flashily, investing money in the business and employees rather than personal luxury. As the evening wound down and most guests had left, David pulled me aside in Dad's study, the room where we'd had countless family discussions about business, life, and responsibility. "Mike," David said, settling into Dad's leather chair like he belonged there, We need to talk about the future of the company. Dad's gone, and it's time to think about where Warwick Manufacturing goes from here. I sat across from him in the same chair I'd occupied during thousands of conversations with our father. I'm listening. David leaned forward, his expression serious. Dad built something incredible, but the world has changed. Our competitors are more sophisticated. Our clients expect different capabilities, and our approach to business development needs to evolve. What specifically are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your leadership style worked perfectly when Dad was here to provide guidance. But now we need someone who understands modern business strategy. Someone who can think beyond the day-to-day operations and focus on long-term growth. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice calm. David, are you questioning my ability to run the company? David's smile was patronizing, the same expression he'd been using for years, when he thought I was missing some obvious business insight. I'm not questioning your dedication, Mike. But let's be honest, you're 59 years old, and your thinking is still rooted in Dad's old-school approach. The company needs fresh leadership if it's going to compete in the modern marketplace. Fresh leadership meaning you. I have an MBA from Stanford, Mike. I understand strategic planning, financial optimization, and market positioning in ways that you've never had to learn. Dad always said this company needed to embrace modern business practices to survive long-term. That last comment hit me like a punch to the gut. Dad never said anything like that to me, David. In fact, just last month he told me he was proud of how I'd grown the company while maintaining the values he'd taught us. David's expression hardened. Maybe Dad said different things to different people, Mike. But the fact remains, you don't deserve to run Dad's company just because you've been here longer. Leadership isn't about seniority. It's about having the vision and skills to take the company where it needs to go. I stared at my brother, seeing a stranger in the face that had been familiar my entire life. You don't deserve to run Dad's company. You're too old school for modern business, Mike. It's time for real leadership. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a welding torch, acrid, toxic, and impossible to ignore. David had just told me, in our father's study on the day we buried him, that I didn't deserve the company I'd spent 35 years building. I stood up slowly, walked to the window that looked out over the backyard where Dad had taught us to throw a baseball, and took a deep breath. When I turned back to David, I was smiling. You know what, David? You might be right about needing modern business practices. I think it's time I started applying some of the strategic thinking I've learned over the years. David looked pleased, probably thinking he'd convinced me to step aside voluntarily. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Mike. I think Dad would be proud of both of us for handling this transition professionally. I shook David's hand, looked him in the eye, and said, I'm sure Dad would be very interested in seeing how this plays out. Then I walked to my car and made that phone call to Lisa Frost, my forensic accountant. By Christmas 2019, I owned David's future, and he had no idea what was coming. But then I discovered David's betrayal went deeper than sibling rivalry, and realized his cruelty was just the surface of a conspiracy that threatened everything Dad had built. The phone call I made from the cemetery parking lot on November 14, 2019, was to Lisa Frost, a forensic accountant I'd worked with during several client audits over the years. Lisa had a reputation for finding financial irregularities that other accountants missed, and she specialized in corporate investigations that required absolute discretion. Lisa, I need a comprehensive financial analysis of my brother's personal and business activities. I have reason to believe there are irregularities that could affect our family company. How deep do you want me to dig, Mike? All the way to the bottom. I want to know everything. His income, his expenses, his investments, his debts, and any financial relationships that might create conflicts of interest with Warwick Manufacturing. Lisa's investigation took 6 weeks, and what she discovered was worse than I'd imagined. David wasn't just arrogant and entitled. He was desperate, compromised, and potentially criminal. The financial picture Lisa uncovered painted a story of systematic deception and escalating desperation. David's gambling addiction, which I'd suspected but never confirmed, was far more serious than I'd realized. He'd been making regular trips to Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and Cherokee Casino, losing massive amounts on poker, blackjack, and sports betting. Over the past 3 years, David had accumulated $2.3 million in debt from various sources. He owed $1.2 million to Las Vegas casinos, $800,000 to private lenders who charged interest rates that would make loan sharks blush, and $300,000 on credit cards that were already maxed out and accruing penalties. But the gambling debts were just the beginning of David's problems. Lisa's analysis revealed that David had been receiving wire transfers from offshore accounts totaling $150,000 over the past 18 months. The transfers came from shell companies registered in Shanghai and Hong Kong, with payment references that made no sense for legitimate business transactions. Mike, Lisa told me during our meeting in her downtown Pittsburgh office, these payment patterns are consistent with someone being compensated for providing proprietary information to foreign entities. The amounts are too large for consulting fees and too regular for investment returns. I felt sick to my stomach as the implications became clear. You're saying David has been selling company information to Chinese competitors? I'm saying the financial evidence suggests that possibility, but to prove it, you'd need access to his communications and travel records, plus documentation of what information he's been accessing within your company systems. That's when I called Tom Rodriguez, a private investigator who specialized in corporate security and industrial espionage cases. Tom had worked with several of our defense contractor clients on sensitive investigations, and he understood the legal and ethical requirements for gathering evidence of potential criminal activity. Tom's surveillance began in January 2020, and within 2 weeks he documented a pattern of behavior that confirmed my worst fears. David was meeting regularly with individuals who appeared to be Chinese nationals, usually in Las Vegas casinos, where the noise and crowds made surveillance difficult. Tom photographed David passing documents to these contacts, accepting envelopes in return, and behaving like someone who knew he was doing something wrong. More damaging was Tom's discovery that David had been accessing our company's computer systems outside normal business hours, downloading blueprints and specifications for projects he had no legitimate reason to review. Our IT security logs showed that David had accessed classified defense contractor files over 40 times in the past year, always during evenings or weekends when other employees weren't around. The most disturbing evidence came from David's own communications. Tom had obtained legal authorization to monitor David's email and phone records as part of a corporate security investigation, and what he found was devastating. David had been communicating with contacts at Shanghai Steelworks, a Chinese manufacturing company that competed directly with Warwick Manufacturing for defense contracts. The emails discussed technical collaboration opportunities and strategic information sharing, but the language was clearly coded references to industrial espionage. In one particularly damaging email from September 2019, David wrote, "The old man is getting suspicious, but he's too focused on traditional methods to understand modern business relationships. Once I have full control of operations, we can expand our collaboration significantly." The old man was obviously our father, who had died 2 months after David wrote that email. David had been planning to sell out American defense contractors while Dad was still alive, and he'd been counting on Dad's death to give him the access he needed to complete his betrayal. But the evidence that made my decision final was a recorded phone conversation Tom captured in February 2020, where David was talking to someone he called Mr. Liu about timing for a major information transfer. "My brother still thinks he's running the company," David said, "but he's too old school to understand modern business development. Once I convince the board that we need fresh leadership, I'll have access to all the classified project files. The pricing information alone will be worth millions to your clients." David wasn't just stealing information for money. He was planning to destroy my reputation, take over the company, and then sell American defense secrets to Chinese competitors. He was planning treason for profit, and he was using our father's death as an opportunity to accelerate his betrayal. That night, I sat in my study looking at the evidence Lisa and Tom had assembled: bank records, photographs, recorded conversations, and computer access logs that proved David had been systematically betraying our family, our employees, and our country. I thought about Dad's last words. Take care of the company, Mike, and take care of your brother. Family is all that matters. Dad had asked me to take care of David, but he'd also asked me to take care of the company. David had made those two responsibilities mutually exclusive. I couldn't protect the company Dad had built while enabling David's betrayal of everything Dad had valued. That's when I decided David had to be removed from Warwick Manufacturing permanently, and I had the perfect leverage to make it happen. David owed $2.3 million to creditors who were getting increasingly aggressive about collection. His gambling addiction and lifestyle expenses meant he had no realistic way to repay those debts from his legitimate income. He was desperate, which made him dangerous, but it also made him vulnerable. Over the next 2 months, I quietly contacted every one of David's creditors and offered to purchase their debt at premium rates. The Las Vegas casinos were happy to sell David's markers for 110% of face value, getting immediate payment for money they weren't sure they'd ever collect. The private lenders were even more eager to sell, since David's debt was already in default, and they were considering more aggressive collection methods. By March 2020, I owned $2.3 million of David's personal debt, and David had no idea his financial lifeline now depended entirely on his brother's goodwill, the same brother he was planning to destroy. But David's arrogance was about to make my revenge even more satisfying than I'd planned. What David didn't know was that I had already secured the financial resources to destroy him completely, and his assumption that he could force me out was about to backfire spectacularly. In February 2020, Warwick Manufacturing had received the largest contract in our company's history, a $15 million defense project to manufacture specialized steel components for Navy submarines. The contract was classified, which meant I couldn't discuss the details with anyone who didn't have security clearance, including David. The profit margins on defense contracts are substantially higher than commercial work, partly because of the specialized requirements and partly because of the security and quality standards involved. The submarine components contract would generate approximately $8 million in profit over 2 years. Giving me the financial resources to execute any strategy I chose, David knew we'd won a major defense contract, but he had no idea of the scope or profitability. This information asymmetry was about to become crucial to my plans. Meanwhile, David's confidence was growing along with his desperation. He'd started scheduling meetings with board members without including me, claiming he wanted to discuss strategic planning initiatives and leadership transition scenarios. Our company board consisted of my mother Helen, our longtime attorney Robert Kim, and Sarah Thorne, our chief financial officer. David apparently believed he could convince them that new leadership was necessary for the company's future. What David didn't realize was that all 3 board members had been asking me questions about his behavior for months. They'd noticed his absences, his expensive lifestyle, and his increasingly disrespectful attitude toward company policies and procedures. In March 2020, David scheduled a formal board meeting to discuss what he called organizational restructuring and leadership optimization. He sent an agenda that included succession planning, modernization strategies, and international business development opportunities. Helen called me the day after she received David's agenda. "Mike, what is your brother planning? This agenda makes it sound like he's proposing major changes to how the company operates." "I think David believes he should be running Warwick Manufacturing instead of me, Mom." There was a long pause before Helen responded. "Your father made his decision about leadership for good reasons, Mike. Frank watched both of you work for decades, and he chose the person he trusted to protect what he'd built. David's education is impressive, but education isn't the same as wisdom. I appreciate your confidence, Mom, but I think David is planning to make his case at the meeting, and I want to be prepared for whatever he proposes." "What kind of preparation are you thinking about?" "The kind that makes sure Dad's company stays in the right hands." The board meeting was scheduled for April 15, 2020, tax day, which David probably thought was symbolic of the financial complexity he believed I couldn't handle. What David didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this confrontation since November, and I had evidence that would end his career, his reputation, and his freedom. But first, I wanted to give David enough rope to hang himself completely. On April 10th, 5 days before the board meeting, David came to my office with a proposal that revealed the full scope of his arrogance and his fundamental misunderstanding of both business ethics and family loyalty. "Mike, I want to discuss a transition plan that benefits everyone involved," David began, settling into the chair across from my desk like he was conducting a job interview. "I'm listening. The company needs younger leadership with modern strategic thinking. You've done a good job with operations, but growth requires different skills than maintenance. I'm proposing a restructuring that recognizes your contributions while positioning the company for long-term success." David pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be a formal business proposal. "I've prepared a buyout offer that gives you fair compensation for your shares while allowing me to implement the changes necessary for future growth." I looked at the document David had prepared. He was offering to buy my 45% ownership stake for $22 million, which was roughly half of what the company was actually worth based on our recent financial performance. "This seems low, David. Our annual revenue is $50 million and our profit margins are improving. $22 million doesn't reflect the company's true value." David's smile was condescending. "Mike, you're thinking like an operator, not a strategist. Company valuations aren't based on current performance. They're based on growth potential and market positioning. Warwick Manufacturing has been successful with traditional approaches, but we're not positioned for the kind of expansion that creates real value." "What kind of expansion are you talking about? International partnerships, technology transfer agreements, strategic alliances with overseas manufacturers? There are opportunities in Asia that could triple our revenue within 5 years, but they require leadership that understands global business development." I felt my jaw tighten as I realized David was describing exactly the kind of arrangements that had been generating his offshore payments for the past 18 months. He wasn't just planning to steal company information, he was planning to formalize the theft through strategic partnerships with the same Chinese competitors he'd been feeding our secrets to. Quick break. Your enemies think you're weak. The wolf's justice proves them wrong. Learn the patience game, resource control, exit strategies that actually work. Set price, $0 to $35. Link is in the video description or scan the QR code on the screen to get it today. Let's continue. "These international opportunities," I said carefully, "do they involve specific companies you've already been in contact with?" David's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Actually, yes. I've been developing relationships with several Asian manufacturers who are very interested in collaboration with American companies. They have capital, manufacturing capacity, and market access that could transform Warwick Manufacturing into a truly global operation." "And you've been discussing this with them without my knowledge?" "I've been doing preliminary relationship building, Mike. That's what business development requires, identifying opportunities before your competitors do. Once we formalize the leadership transition, we can move forward with concrete partnership agreements." I leaned back in my chair, marveling at David's ability to describe treason as business development. "David, these Asian companies you've been talking to, are they competitors of ours?" "Competition is an outdated concept, Mike. Modern business is about collaboration, strategic alliances, and mutual benefit. The companies I'm working with aren't competitors. They're potential partners who can help us access markets we could never penetrate independently." "What about our defense contractor clients? How do they fit into these international partnerships?" David waved dismissively. "Defense work is a dead end, Mike. The margins are good, but the security requirements limit our growth potential. Commercial manufacturing is where the real money is, and that's where international partnerships become valuable." I realized that David didn't just want to steal our defense contracts. He wanted to eliminate them entirely, so he could focus on selling American manufacturing capabilities to Chinese competitors without the inconvenience of security clearances and patriotic obligations. "David, I need to ask you something directly. Have you shared any proprietary information about our current projects with these potential partners?" David's hesitation lasted just long enough to confirm my suspicions. "I've provided general information about our capabilities and capacity. That's standard practice in business development discussions. General information about classified defense projects. Nothing classified, Mike. Just general manufacturing capabilities and production capacity information that any potential partner would need to evaluate collaboration opportunities. David was lying, and we both knew it. Tom Rodriguez had photographs of David passing classified blueprints to Chinese contacts, and our computer logs showed he'd accessed specific defense project files dozens of times. But I wanted David to commit fully to his position before I revealed what I knew. So your proposal is that I sell my shares to you at below market value, step away from the company I've spent 35 years building, and allow you to enter into partnerships with foreign manufacturers that may or may not serve American interests. My proposal is that you accept fair compensation for your contributions while allowing Warwick Manufacturing to evolve into the kind of company Dad would have wanted it to become. That last comment was the final straw. David was now claiming that betraying American defense contractors and selling classified information to Chinese competitors was what our father would have wanted. You know what, David? I think you're absolutely right about the company needing to evolve. And I think Dad would be very interested in seeing exactly what kind of evolution you have in mind. David smiled broadly, apparently believing he'd convinced me to accept his buyout offer. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Mike. The board meeting on Wednesday will be a formality. We can announce the transition and start implementing changes immediately. Wednesday's meeting should definitely be interesting, I agreed. I think everyone will learn something important about the future of Warwick Manufacturing. As David left my office, I watched him walk down the hallway with the confident stride of someone who believed he'd just pulled off the business coup of his career. He had no idea that in 5 days he'd be facing federal investigators, bankruptcy proceedings, and the complete destruction of everything he thought he'd accomplished. Are you Team Mike? Let me know in the comments what you would have done, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're loving this story. David's confidence over the next 5 days was almost painful to watch. He scheduled meetings with key employees to discuss upcoming organizational changes. He called several of our largest clients to introduce himself as the incoming president of Warwick Manufacturing. He even had new business cards printed with President and CEO as his title. What David didn't know was that I'd already contacted every one of those clients to warn them about potential security breaches and unauthorized communications. Our defense contractor clients were particularly concerned about David's apparent assumption that he could speak for the company without proper authorization. On April 14th, one day before our board meeting, I implemented the final phase of my plan. At 9 a.m. that Tuesday morning, David received certified mail delivery of collection notices from 3 different debt collection agencies, all demanding immediate payment of debts totaling $2.3 million. The notices informed David that his debts had been sold to new creditors who required payment within 48 hours or would initiate bankruptcy proceedings and asset seizure. At 10 a.m., David burst into my office waving the collection notices and demanding to know if I had any idea what was happening with his financial situation. These collection agencies are claiming I owe over $2 million, Mike. This has to be some kind of mistake or fraud. I need the company's legal team to investigate immediately. I looked at the notices David was waving around. David, these appear to be legitimate debt collection documents. Are you saying you don't actually owe this money? I mean, I have some outstanding obligations, but nothing like these amounts, and certainly nothing that requires immediate payment. This has to be some kind of coordinated attack on my financial standing. A coordinated attack? Who would want to attack your financial standing, David? David's paranoia was escalating rapidly. I don't know, Mike. Maybe competitors who want to prevent Warwick Manufacturing from implementing our international partnerships. Maybe government agencies that don't understand modern business development. Maybe someone who's threatened by the changes I'm planning to make. I nodded sympathetically. That does sound concerning, David. Do you have the resources to pay these debts if they turn out to be legitimate? Of course not. Nobody keeps $2 million in cash sitting around. I'd need to liquidate investments, refinance properties, maybe sell some assets. That process takes time, which these collection agencies apparently aren't willing to provide. What assets are you thinking about liquidating? David's expression became calculating. Well, my Warwick Manufacturing shares are my most valuable asset. If I had to sell them quickly to raise cash, I'd need to find a buyer who could close immediately. I leaned forward with interest. How much do you think your shares are worth, David? Based on current company performance, probably around 15 to 20 million, but in a forced sale situation, I might have to accept a discount for immediate liquidity. David was now exactly where I wanted him, desperate for cash and willing to sell his company shares at below-market prices. David, I might be interested in purchasing your shares if the price is reasonable and the transaction can close quickly. David's face lit up with relief and gratitude. Mike, that would solve everything. We're family. So I know you'd offer a fair price, and it would keep the ownership within the family, which is what Dad would have wanted. What would you consider a fair price for a quick cash sale? David thought for a moment. Given the urgency and the family nature of the transaction, I'd be willing to sell my 30% stake for $12 million. That's a discount from full market value, but it gives me the liquidity I need and keeps the company in family hands. $12 million for shares worth at least $25 million. David was so desperate to pay debts, he didn't know I owned that he was offering to sell me control of the company at a 50% discount. I'll need to review the legal requirements and financing options, but that sounds like a reasonable arrangement, David. Should we plan to discuss this at tomorrow's board meeting? Actually, Mike, I think we should handle the share transfer separately from the board meeting. The board meeting is for discussing strategic direction and leadership transition. The ownership change is a private family financial transaction. David still believed he was going to convince the board to remove me as CEO, even while he was selling me the shares that would give me absolute control of the company. His greed and desperation had completely clouded his strategic thinking. That makes sense, David. Let's see how the board meeting goes, and then we can finalize the share purchase based on whatever organizational changes the board approves. Perfect. Mike, I really appreciate you helping me through this financial situation. I know we've had our differences about company direction, but family looks out for family. As David left my office that afternoon, I realized he still had no idea that I was the coordinated attack on his financial standing. He thought I was his salvation, not his destroyer. Tomorrow's board meeting was going to be very educational for everyone involved. The moment I revealed the evidence of David's espionage at our April 15th board meeting, David's face went pale and he realized he had underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. Our company's main conference room had hosted thousands of meetings over the decades, but never one as consequential as the gathering that took place at 2 p.m. on April 15, 2020. The conference table that Dad had chosen in 1975, solid oak, built to last, was about to witness the end of David's corporate career and the salvation of everything our father had built. Present were the 4 board members, myself, my mother Helen, our corporate attorney Robert Kim, and our CFO Sarah Thorne. David had requested to present to the board as a non-voting participant, believing he was about to convince them that leadership change was necessary for the company's future. David arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing his most expensive suit. His confidence was remarkable considering he'd received debt collection notices the previous day, but David had always been skilled at compartmentalizing his problems. "Thank you all for making time for this important discussion," David began, settling into his usual seat at the foot of the table. "Today's meeting will determine the future direction of Warwick Manufacturing, and I believe the decisions we make will honor Dad's legacy while positioning the company for unprecedented growth." Robert Kim, who'd been our family attorney for 25 years, gestured for David to continue. "The floor is yours, David. Please present your proposal." David opened his portfolio and distributed copies of a presentation he'd prepared. The cover page read, "Harrison Manufacturing Strategic Transformation for Global Leadership." Over the past several months, I've been analyzing our company's position in the global manufacturing marketplace, David continued. While we've been successful with traditional approaches, we're missing opportunities that could transform Warwick Manufacturing from a regional supplier into an international manufacturing powerhouse. Helen looked skeptical. "What kind of opportunities are you referring to, David?" "Partnership opportunities with Asian manufacturers who have capital, technology, and market access that American companies typically lack. I've been developing relationships with several potential partners who are eager to collaborate with established American manufacturers like ourselves. Sarah Thorne, our CFO, raised her hand. David, have these discussions involved sharing information about our capabilities, client relationships, or current projects? David's hesitation was barely noticeable, but I caught it. I've provided general information about our manufacturing capacity and technical capabilities. That's standard practice in business development discussions. What about information regarding our defense contractor relationships? Robert Kim asked. Those relationships involve security clearances and confidentiality requirements that limit what information can be shared with foreign entities. Defense work represents less than 30% of our revenue, David replied dismissively. My strategic focus is on the 70% of our business that has unlimited growth potential through international partnerships. I looked around the table at the board members' expressions. They were clearly concerned about David's casual attitude toward our defense contracts, but David was just getting started. The real opportunity, David continued, lies in leveraging our manufacturing expertise through strategic partnerships that can access global markets. American companies typically can't penetrate independently. I've identified specific partners who can provide capital investment, technology transfer, and market access that would triple our revenue within 5 years. Helen leaned forward. David, these partnerships you're describing, do they require sharing proprietary information about our manufacturing processes or client relationships? Modern business development requires information sharing, Mom. You can't build partnerships without transparency about capabilities and mutual value creation. Robert Kim's expression was becoming increasingly stern. David, information sharing with foreign manufacturing entities could violate our security clearances and our contractual obligations with defense contractors. Have you consulted with legal counsel about the compliance requirements for these discussions? That's exactly the kind of old-school thinking that's holding us back, David replied, his frustration beginning to show. Compliance requirements are bureaucratic obstacles that prevent American companies from competing in the global marketplace. Our competitors aren't limited by these restrictions, which is why they're growing while we're stagnating. Sarah Thorne looked shocked. David, are you suggesting we should violate federal security requirements to pursue business opportunities? I'm suggesting we should pursue legitimate business opportunities that happen to require modern approaches to information sharing and strategic collaboration. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed what David had just said. He'd essentially admitted to sharing classified information with foreign entities and dismissed federal security requirements as bureaucratic obstacles. But I wasn't ready to reveal my evidence yet. I wanted David to dig his hole even deeper. David, I said calmly, can you be more specific about these partnerships you've been developing? Who are these potential partners, and what exactly have you discussed with them? David's eyes lit up with enthusiasm, apparently believing I was finally showing interest in his strategic vision. The primary relationship I've been developing is with Shanghai Steel Works, one of China's most sophisticated manufacturing companies. They have production capacity, capital resources, and government connections that could transform Warwick manufacturing into a truly global operation. Helen's face went pale. David, Shanghai Steelworks is one of our direct competitors for defense contracts. Why would you be discussing partnerships with a company that bids against us? That's traditional competitive thinking, Mum. Modern business is about turning competitors into collaborators through mutually beneficial strategic arrangements. Robert Kim was taking notes frantically. David, what information have you shared with Shanghai Steelworks about our capabilities, our clients, or our current projects? I've shared information necessary for them to understand our value as a potential partner. Manufacturing specifications, production capacity data, quality certifications, the kind of information any serious partner would need to evaluate collaboration opportunities. Sarah Thorne was staring at David in disbelief. Manufacturing specifications for defense projects? David, that information is classified. Sharing it with foreign entities is a federal crime. David waved dismissively. Classification is a bureaucratic designation that prevents American companies from accessing global opportunities. The information I've shared is basic manufacturing capability data that any sophisticated partner needs to understand our potential value. I realized David was so deep into his rationalization that he genuinely believed espionage was just aggressive business development. He'd convinced himself that selling classified information to Chinese competitors was entrepreneurial thinking rather than treason. That's when I decided it was time to present the evidence that would end David's career and save our company. "David," I said, reaching for the folder I'd placed beside my chair, "before we discuss your strategic vision any further, I think the board should review some information that's relevant to these partnership discussions." I placed copies of Lisa Frost's financial analysis in front of each board member. Over the past several months, I've been concerned about some irregular activities involving company information and resources. I hired a forensic accountant to investigate, and the results are disturbing. David's confident expression began to change as he watched the board members review the financial documents. This analysis shows that David has been receiving wire transfers from offshore accounts associated with Shanghai Steel Works, totaling $150,000 over the past 18 months, I continued. The payment schedule corresponds exactly with David's access to classified project files in our computer system. Helen looked up from the documents with horror in her eyes. "David, is this true? Have you been accepting money from Chinese companies?" "Those payments are consulting fees for legitimate business development services," David replied, but his voice had lost its confident tone. "I've been helping them understand American manufacturing capabilities in preparation for potential partnerships." Robert Kim was reading through the evidence methodically. "David, these payments appear to be compensation for providing proprietary information to foreign competitors. That's corporate espionage and potentially treason." "This is a misunderstanding," David said desperately. "Everything I've done has been focused on creating value for Warwick Manufacturing through strategic partnerships." I placed a second set of documents on the table. These are photographs taken by a private investigator showing David passing company documents to Chinese contacts in Las Vegas casinos. The documents include classified blueprints for defense projects that David had no legitimate reason to access. Sarah Thorne was studying the photographs with growing alarm. "David, these are blueprints for the submarine components project. This information is classified at the highest levels. Sharing it with foreign nationals is a federal crime punishable by decades in prison." David's face was now completely pale. "Mike, what are you trying to do here? We're family. We can work out any misunderstandings about business development activities." "David," I said, placing the final piece of evidence on the table, "this is a transcript of a recorded phone conversation between you and someone you called Mr. Liu from Shanghai Steelworks. In this conversation, you described me as expendable old-timer and discussed plans to gain full access to classified project files after removing me from company leadership." Helen was reading the transcript with tears in her eyes. "David, you were planning to destroy your brother's reputation so you could steal classified information more easily?" "Mom, you have to understand, I was trying to position the company for long-term success. Mike's leadership style is holding us back from opportunities that could make us incredibly wealthy." "By committing treason?" Robert Kim asked sharply. "David, you've been selling American defense secrets to Chinese competitors. That's not business development. That's betraying your country for personal profit." David stood up abruptly, his composure completely shattered. "This is entrapment. Mike has been setting me up, gathering evidence, manipulating the situation to make me look guilty." "David," I said quietly, "I didn't make you take money from Chinese competitors. I didn't make you steal classified blueprints. I didn't make you plan to destroy my reputation so you could access more classified information. I simply documented what you chose to do. But you've been planning this confrontation for months. You orchestrated this entire situation. What I orchestrated, David, was the protection of everything Dad built from someone who was willing to sell it to foreign competitors for gambling money." The room fell silent as David realized his situation was hopeless. The evidence was overwhelming. His admissions were recorded, and his justifications were transparently self-serving. Robert Kim spoke first. "David, Based on the evidence presented here today, the board has no choice but to terminate your employment immediately and report these activities to federal authorities. Your actions constitute corporate espionage, violation of security clearances, and potential treason. Helen was crying openly. David, how could you do this to your family? How could you betray your brother and your country for money? I was trying to make us rich, David shouted. Everyone else is playing by different rules, making deals with foreign partners, maximizing opportunities. I was just trying to compete. You were trying to compete by selling American defense secrets to Chinese competitors, Sarah Thorne said coldly. That's not business development, David. That's treason. I stood up and walked around the table to where David was standing. David, there's one more thing you need to know. Those debt collection notices you received yesterday. I purchased all $2.3 million of your debts from your creditors. Your gambling debts, your private loans, your credit card balances. I own all of it. David stared at me in shock. You've been buying my debts? I've been protecting this company from someone who was stealing classified information to pay gambling debts. Your desperation made you a national security risk, David. Your greed made you a traitor. What do you want from me? David whispered. I want you to sign papers transferring your 30% ownership stake in Warwick Manufacturing to me in exchange for forgiveness of your $2.3 million debt. Then I want you to resign from the company, surrender your security clearances, and cooperate fully with the federal investigation. And if I refuse, then you face bankruptcy proceedings, federal prosecution for espionage, and likely decades in prison for selling classified information to foreign competitors. David collapsed back into his chair, finally understanding that his strategic vision had destroyed his career, his reputation, and his freedom. The choice is yours, David, I continued. Sign the share transfer documents and cooperate with investigators, or face the full legal consequences of your actions. David looked around the table at the board members who'd watched him confess to treason. Do I have any other options? Robert Kim answered. David, given the evidence presented here today, cooperation is your only chance to avoid spending the rest of your life in federal prison. With shaking hands, David signed the documents transferring his shares to me. By 4:30 p.m. on April 15, 2020, I owned 75% of Warwick Manufacturing and had complete control of the company our father had built. As David left the conference room for the last time, he turned back and asked, Mike, was this all just revenge for what I said at Dad's funeral? I looked at my younger brother, seeing the consequences of choices he'd made long before our father's death. David, this wasn't revenge, this was justice. Dad asked me to take care of the company and take care of you. I couldn't do both when you chose to betray everything he valued. What happens to me now? That depends on how much you help the FBI understand the scope of the information you provided to Chinese competitors. But David, your career in American manufacturing is over. No defense contractor will ever trust you again. David walked out of Warwick Manufacturing that afternoon and never returned. 6 months later, he pled guilty to federal espionage charges and received a 12-year prison sentence. His extraordinary cooperation with investigators revealed a broader network of Chinese industrial espionage that led to multiple arrests and the protection of classified information worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Looking back 4 years later, I discovered that protecting your family's legacy sometimes requires removing family members who betray it, and I learned that loyalty to country and company must come before loyalty to people who choose personal profit over patriotic duty. Today, as I write this from my office overlooking the expanded Warwick manufacturing facility in Pittsburgh, I can see the results of the decisions I made on that November afternoon in 2019 when David told me I didn't deserve to run Dad's company. Harrison Manufacturing now employs over 400 people, has annual revenue of $85 million, and holds defense contracts worth over $200 million. We've become one of Pennsylvania's most respected manufacturing companies, known for quality, security, and absolute reliability in handling classified projects. The submarine components contract that provided the financial resources for my strategy against David led to additional Navy contracts, Army projects, and Air Force manufacturing agreements. Our reputation for protecting classified information has made us the preferred supplier for defense projects that require the highest levels of security and trust. Most importantly, we've maintained the values Dad taught us: integrity, craftsmanship, and service to country. Every employee understands that we're not just manufacturing steel components. We're supporting the men and women who defend America, and that responsibility requires the highest standards of character and competence. David's betrayal forced me to confront a painful truth. Family loyalty becomes toxic when family members betray the principles that made the family successful. Dad asked me to take care of David, but he also asked me to take care of the company. When David made those responsibilities mutually exclusive, I had to choose the greater good over personal relationships. The investigation that followed David's arrest revealed the extent of Chinese industrial espionage targeting American manufacturing companies. David's cooperation helped FBI investigators identify dozens of other cases where Chinese competitors were paying American employees for classified information. His case became a teaching example for defense contractors about the importance of monitoring employee financial stress and foreign contacts. Helen, now 86, remains active on our board of directors and frequently tells visitors that she's proud of how I protected the company Frank built. Mike made the hardest decision a person can make, she tells people, but it was the right decision. Sometimes protecting your family means removing family members who choose to hurt the family. The employees who worked with David for decades were initially shocked by the revelations about his espionage activities. But as the full scope of his betrayal became clear, they expressed gratitude that I'd acted to protect their jobs and their security clearances. Many of our workers have sons and daughters serving in the military, and they understood that David's actions could have compromised the safety of American service members. Our clients, particularly defense contractors, increased their business with Warwick Manufacturing after David's arrest. They saw our handling of the security breach as evidence of our commitment to protecting classified information and maintaining the highest standards of patriotic service. Several contracts that we'd been competing for were awarded to us, specifically because of our demonstrated reliability in handling security issues. The financial impact of acquiring David's shares at a discount has been substantial. The company's value has more than doubled since 2020, making my investment in David's debts one of the most profitable decisions I've ever made. But the money was never the point. The point was ensuring that the company Dad built would continue serving American interests rather than foreign competitors. David's original 12-year sentence was later reduced to drastically because of his extraordinary cooperation with federal investigators. With good conduct credits, he completed his time and was released in January 2025. He now works at a hardware store in Ohio, making $15 per hour and living in a small apartment. His security clearances were permanently revoked, and he's prohibited from working in manufacturing, defense contracting, or any industry involving classified information. We haven't spoken since the day he left the company. Helen occasionally mentions that David has asked about reconciliation, but I believe some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. David didn't just betray me. He betrayed our father's memory, our employees' trust, and our country's security. Those aren't personal disagreements that can be resolved through family discussions. But I don't hate David. I pity him. He had everything: education, opportunity, family support, and the chance to build something meaningful. He chose to throw it all away for gambling money and Chinese payments that totaled less than he could have earned through legitimate profit sharing over the same period. David's story has become a cautionary tale in our industry about the dangers of financial desperation and foreign influence. Business schools use his case to teach students about ethics, security, and the long-term consequences of short-term thinking. His downfall illustrates how quickly pride and greed can destroy careers that took decades to build. The most satisfying aspect of the outcome isn't David's punishment. It's the success of Warwick Manufacturing under principled leadership. We've proven that American companies can compete globally without compromising security, that family businesses can thrive while maintaining family values, and that integrity creates more value than corruption ever could. Our newest employees, many of whom were hired after David's departure, often ask about the company's history and values. I tell them about Frank Warwick, who built something lasting through honest work and patriotic service. I tell them about the importance of protecting classified information and serving American interests. I tell them that character matters more than cleverness, and that reputation is the most valuable asset any company can possess. But I don't often talk about David. His story is a reminder that talent without character is worthless, that education without ethics is dangerous, and that family connections without loyalty are meaningless. The lesson I've learned is that protecting what your parents built sometimes requires making enemies of people you once loved. David forced me to choose between family harmony and family legacy, and I chose the legacy. I chose the values Dad taught us over the brother who abandoned those values. 5 years later, I'm confident I made the right choice. Warwick Manufacturing employs more people, serves more clients, and contributes more to American defense capabilities than ever before. The company Dad started with a $5,000 loan continues to grow and thrive under leadership that honors his memory and his principles. David's attempt to steal what Dad built ultimately strengthened it by removing the one person who was willing to sell it to foreign competitors. His betrayal forced me to become a better leader, a more strategic thinker, and a more vigilant protector of American manufacturing capabilities. Sometimes the best thing you can do for family is remove family members who choose to destroy what the family has built. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is hold them accountable for their choices, even when those choices lead to consequences they can't handle. David said, "I didn't deserve to run Dad's company because I was too old school for modern business." He was right about being old school. I believe in integrity, patriotism, and putting American interests before personal profit. But he was wrong about deserving. I deserved to run the company because I was willing to sacrifice personal relationships to protect it. David deserved to lose everything because he was willing to sacrifice everything Dad built for personal gain. What's the most satisfying moment of justice you've witnessed? Share your story in the comments, and if this inspired you, smash that subscribe button for more incredible tales of justice served. The greatest victory isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so valuable that their attempts to steal it only make it stronger. David tried to take Warwick Manufacturing away from the family that built it. Instead, his betrayal ensured that the company will remain in principled hands for generations to come. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about protection. And sometimes protecting what matters most requires removing the people who threaten it, even when those people share your blood. David taught me that family loyalty has limits, and that those limits are defined by loyalty to principles that matter more than personal relationships. He taught me that character is revealed under pressure, and that some people will always choose personal benefit over family legacy when the stakes get high enough. But most importantly, David taught me that the values Frank Warwick instilled in us, integrity, craftsmanship, and service to country, are worth fighting for, even when the fight is against family members who abandon those values. Today, Warwick Manufacturing stands as proof that American companies can thrive through principled leadership, that family businesses can grow while maintaining family values, and that protecting what your parents built sometimes requires sacrifices that hurt but heal. Dad would be proud of the company we've become and the principles we've maintained. He'd be disappointed in David's choices, but proud of the choice I made to protect everything he worked for. That's the legacy worth preserving, and that's the victory worth celebrating. Don't forget, my ebook, The Wolf's Justice, is waiting for you in the description, or scan the QR code on the screen to download your strategic playbook. Learn the long game, protect your empire, set your price. You've earned this knowledge. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you that character matters more than convenience, that principles matter more than personal relationships, and that protecting what matters most sometimes requires difficult choices, then please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to our channel for more interesting revenge stories uploaded weekly. And remember, When someone tells you that your values are old school, they might be telling you exactly why those values are worth defending. Until next time, stay strong and healthy. See you in the next video.